My name's Hunter Cheney. I'm one of the directors for the American Heritage Museum and the Collings Foundation. This is particularly special to me personally. I've lost so many amazing World War II veterans in the last couple years, many of them aviators. When our World War II veterans pass on, they take with them a lot of their memories, a lot of who they are and their legacies. And this is something that I'm dearly going to miss. We're at the last throes of this generation. Most of the World War II veterans now are somewhere between 101 and 105. We're going to see Joe Peterburs a little bit later this afternoon, who's 102, I think. It's not going to be 101. Thanks, David. It's not going to be long before most of these veterans are gone, and with them, they take their stories. There's a reason why we call this the greatest generation, and it's hearing stories that we realize why we call them the greatest generation. And so I'm really looking forward to this presentation. Please, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to put this in here. Does this fit in here?
Yeah, it just right. There you go.
Right. All right. I might have to lean over a little bit because of my height. Thank you all for coming. This is a wonderful opportunity for me, and I want to first thank Hunter Cheney and the American Heritage Museum for the opportunity to be here. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. I'll just hold it. Maybe you can do the slides. Because you can. Okay. So basically, this is a personal story as well as sharing history of aviation. Through my grandfather's life. If you were to put bookends for my grandfather's life, specifically within aviation, you would start on one side of the bookend, which would be World War I, and then he would transition through the early development of the airplane and usage in a variety of different ways, all the way to a very responsible position developing photo reconnaissance for World War II. And so bookend-wise, he spans that full gap. What I thought I would do is just to cover some of the areas of his life, and then I'll talk more specifically about his involvement in aviation in wartime and not wartime. Basically, he will begin with World War I, and there's so much feedback. Am I standing too close? Or that is, in fact, my grandfather smiling widely and my father. And I put that there because, obviously, I need to include the connection between myself, my father at 9 years old, and my grandfather, who I would never meet. He would certainly be very proud to have his memory brought to life, and I'm very proud to have spent the time and research and written a book. Let me take you through some of the chapters of his life. So, as I mentioned, it begins in World War I. He's a cadet at Princeton University in ground school. This is an archive picture of what he would have been exposed to. Your cadets working to understand the assembly and the frame, and later the operation and the engines of a World War I plane. And that is the Jenny, which was the main flight trainer that was used for all the different training schools for air flight that were developed around the country after World War I broke out. So my grandfather certainly would have learned to fly first in that plane, which was designed and built by Glenn Hammond Curtis, who has examples of planes in this very hangar in several areas. So graduating to combat, this is actually still in flight school in Mineola, Long Island, the famous Mineola flight area where, in fact, Lindbergh took off on his historic flight across the Atlantic and other famous flights occurred. They were learning to obviously navigate the airway and to have the relationship between the bomber pilot, which would have been my grandfather's role in World War I, and then the gunner, that also includes a camera. Earliest evidence of photo reconnaissance, which was very crude then. So in flight, there is what the biplane flown by, in that case, the French Breguet, which was the squadron, the French squadron in World War I that my grandfather would fly for in 1918. This, in fact, is a fully operational biplane that has the gunner obviously visible along with the bomber pilot. My grandfather was selected to be a bomber pilot. He, in fact, found himself in situations where he had to reverse the role, and he was credited with shooting down 3 German aircraft during World War I. So he certainly became very familiar with the operation of these biplanes in their early development. Leaving World War I, he would find himself directly involved in the airmail, the development of the airplane for airmail. And there were several leaders in that development: financiers, capitalists, plane designers, etc. So on the left, we have Howard Earl Coffin, who was a very important capitalist and financier during that period of time, who had a vision for the development of flight and also was involved in his own automobile company. And then we have Glenn Hammond Curtis in the middle in his pusher plane, which I believe we have over here. This is a very early photo of him. He later would develop a multitude of prototypes and be one of the true leaders in design of planes. And to the right, we have Martin Marietta, who would also be not only a pilot, but he would advance the design of airplanes. Airmail was a concept that came about with all these players. The government decided that there was a usage for the plane after World War I, and that would be the direction of airmail. So my grandfather went to airfields to watch demonstrations, to look at design, to be a part of this group as they were coming together to provide the government with a viable plane for the beginning of the airmail system. My grandfather would jump to Wall Street and become a broker there, using his finance skills that he learned with the other financiers of the airmail system. And I'm going to jump through that because I'll run out of time otherwise. Back to aviation, he's going to leave Wall Street, and then he's going to become a part of the pre-commercial route-to-route competitions that were going on to further develop the commercial use of the airplane. And he would certainly be competing with a variety of different pilots who were both eager to compete and eager maybe to get some recognition and some future employment should the development of the commercial airplane occur. So in many ways, he went aviation-wise from World War I to this role and kind of fell in love with flying all over again. So I have a lot of records in my book related to the different other pilots and flyers that he was competing with, and it was a very exciting and very probably dangerous but thrilling period for these early pilots' lives. They were basically setting the routes, if you can imagine, that we take for granted now. Who's the fastest flyer from New York to Chicago? Who's the fastest flyer from Chicago to Washington, D.C.? And then they're flying to Mexico, to Canada, and the greatest pilots are going overseas to Europe to fly routes there. He also will take on a slightly political role after the alcohol is prohibited and during Prohibition. He will serve as a representative for one of the anti-prohibition movements called the Crusaders. And there he is in the cockpit of his plane after having landed in Cuba, so it's legally allowed for him to have a drink there. So this is a bit of a promo that was going on. But he flew a lot of routes during this period of time, experimenting with a different plane design and a different propeller, et cetera. So he was always seeking to try to find, as all these pilots were, a better designed plane and a better performing plane. He would marry after that period of time, and this is not related to aviation, but very quickly this does lead to another issue. He, as many pilots, would experience near crashes. So I do cover two incidents that are, I think, illuminating of the lifestyle and maybe the dare and what was in the character of a lot of these pilots, because they really had to be, they really had to manage all the issues that could occur in the sky, mapping, outlining your flight path, any sort of mechanical issues, where might I land if something went wrong. So two examples. Before he meets his wife to be in New York City, he's had two fairly close misses. When he was working in the stock exchange, he decided, with the permission of his brokerage founder, that he could fly out of Manhattan off the East River with a friend in a biplane. They were both brokers working for a brokerage at that time. This is 1928. And they were going to go look for gold mining finds in Canada. Well, they disappeared. And it ended up that they had to self-rescue themselves. The plane had mechanical trouble, went down in the wilderness in Canada. He and his co-pilot and somebody else who had come along for a ride, and that person was sorry that he had hopped aboard at that time. They walked for 2 days through the wilderness to get to a ranger station in Canada, and therein they were saved and found a canoe and a way back to get to a plane and back to the brokerage in Manhattan. So in a sense, plucked from chance and circumstance. With the Crusaders, he had associations with a lot of other political individuals, one of which he would fly to a union meeting, and he took off on Staten Island in New York with this representative who was due to speak at a conference, and he was to fly him there. And instantaneously, the plane, several hundred feet above Staten Island, shook so violently that it was falling apart. He jumped out the side of the plane with his parachute and instructed the union manager to do the same. Unfortunately, he's the only one that survived. The plane then fell and crashed into the Staten Island suburbs. So I kind of feel that at this point in his life, he's taken a deep breath and he's survived a lot of close calls, and he's married someone who will take him back to an interest in horse riding. But I'm not going to have time to cover that. So he'll become, in effect, a cowboy in Texas, and he and his wife will be seeking to develop a racehorse that will be accepted by the organization that certifies racehorses in the United States, and that's called the American Quarter Horse. And that's the horse, and there's my grandfather once again. So off to World War II, what history doesn't allow for is for you to wait and wait for a moment in time where you're going to have an historical involvement. So he would be called back to Washington, D.C. in 1942 to 43, realizing that because of his flight experience, that he'd be asked to spearhead and command the development of the first photo reconnaissance pilot squadron that would be the 13th photo reconnaissance. So he would begin by developing that with his young rookie pilots in Colorado Springs in Colorado in 1942. This is a compressed period of time. Quickly moving forward, he's going to find himself with a somewhat trained group of young squadron pilots that will then fly over to England, and they will be at a airfield called Poddington first and then Mount Farm afterwards. And there he is in England, and that would be Poddington or Mount Farm. So he, with this group of young rookie pilots, would be the photo reconnaissance support in time, 1943-44, that supported the 8th Air Force as the 8th Air Force was flying over to Nazi-occupied Europe and bombing. So that would be, I would say, his largest military role. This is a picture of him landing after making the first photo reconnaissance flight over Nazi-occupied Europe. He would rise to the level of a colonel over time, but there's a lot of steps along the way. In many cases, as you have photo reconnaissances representing a new type of technology, they were always, as a group, trying to find ways around issues and problems. So troubleshooting became a main direction and responsibility of his life as the commander of the photo reconnaissance group of the 13th and the 7th. And what they found was that technology didn't necessarily work interchangeably. The frames, the glass frames for the lenses were warping. They had to be reground. They found that the radio transmissions to the photo reconnaissance pilots had enormous interference. And so they had to work with the technology that existed to correct the transmission problem, because it was absolutely critical for the photo reconnaissance pilots to hear a communication that would relate to enemy pilots or enemy squadrons that may be in the air around them. What is not always obvious is that the photo reconnaissance plane is unarmed. So you have your eyes and your ability to detect an enemy imminently and your skill as a flyer. So there were a lot of issues that related to the performance of the photo reconnaissance airplane that my grandfather had to address, and the photo lab itself ran 24/7 on these bases. And in many ways, I have to feel that I think he had a charisma and an ability to really show his care and his support of his squadron, although he was already, to them, an older man. a generation past. In many ways, he, I think, represented to them possibly a father figure. And I have several letters from pilots who flew under him. They're no longer alive, but I have their letters, and they're very revealing about character and about relationships. Obviously, when you're in a war environment and when you are together, the cohesiveness of the team is very important, and that comes through in my research and what I've learned about my grandfather. So this is the F5 converted from a P-38, so it's unarmed, and the 3 to 5 cameras are actually in the nose of the airplane. And the photographs are remarkably clear. And what I learned certainly was that in many ways, the photo reconnaissance pilots, and there's a photo he's holding of a harbor in France under German occupation. In many ways, part of his job with the photo reconnaissance younger pilots was to keep them motivated, keep them excited, keep them committed to getting out and taking these photographs, of which there were thousands. He pointed out to them as they felt, in a sense, possibly secondary because a fighter pilot is actually physically out there to shoot down the enemy pilot. They're there to collect intelligence. He pointed out to them time and time again that the photographs that they were bringing back are vital and have vital information. And a number of circumstances, certainly, where the pilot didn't realize that he just photographed the location of a major rubber plant or the location of a major military factory, and therefore, in kind of less glamorous ways, the photo reconnaissance pilot has in effect given the target for the 8th to go bomb. So part of his role certainly was to keep morale high, as they certainly had not the scale and size and number of pilots and crew that the 8th Air Force had, but relative to their size, which was minuscule compared to the 8th, they did lose a high percentage of pilots. So there was morale involved. So finally, here's a photograph. So, I mean, if it was actually an 8 by 10 black and white on that table, you'd get the greater detail. This explodes it a bit, but you can see buildings, causeways, certainly the harbor. You can see the docking of a boat in the harbor. So photo reconnaissance had gotten to a stage when my father was commanding the 13th and the 7th, and then later became director of overall photo reconnaissance. Photo reconnaissance was developing to a stage where the technology, the lens, the sharpness, all that's involved in that process of furthering better photographs with greater detail, it was evolving to be an absolutely effective tool for the Allies to start to build and to start to prepare for the decision they'd made to invade Europe through the French coastline of Normandy. So he, in effect, is going to move, my grandfather, in effect, is going to have his role move from, in a sense, not directed entirely at supporting the 8th, but still in a certain high percentage of support. But he is tasked by the upper Allied chiefs of staffs to photograph all of the Normandy coastline in anticipation of the D-Day invasion. So he will focus his part of his squadron in that process. And there will be, as every area, every segment of the Allied forces felt, there was a stepped up schedule that basically said, we need you to do something that would take 48 hours. We need you to do it in 24 hours. So their flying schedule, as with other pilots, certainly in the A's, did not allow for them to have much rest. So there was certainly a period of intense flight for them and doing thousands upon thousands of photographs. And they began to relate to a much larger picture in that even in the area of North Africa, the first stronghold of the Allies, in Tunisia, which was held by the Axis, by the enemy, it was specifically for photo reconnaissance that allowed for the identification of the fortified cannons and artillery in Tunisia that allowed them to take out that fortification in Tunisia in a matter of 48 hours. So thus that would be a critical, tangible example. And then also the battleships from Germany that were outfitted to go up towards Norway and that whole area and to continue to sabotage and sink our supply line that was going to England. It was critical. They were able to really identify through photo reconnaissance those individual battleships, and the Allied forces were able to sink those before they attacked another supply line of ships going from the United States to England. And so that's the F-5 in flight, and you can even see the pilot. And there's my father, looking very much older than 50 years old with gray hair, but there always was a grin on his face whenever he was in the cockpit, and I think he was at home in flight, and it's something that he took to and loved, and I'm certain that it's something he might have been sharing more with us as a family had he lived a little bit longer, but he was an enthusiastic and charismatic man in many ways, and I'm so glad that I had an opportunity to know him through research, and I find that the learning experience personally for me began with the military service record, and then the rest of it was a matter of trying to dig out all the different sources of information you find in databases and online newspapers. But I find that in many ways he would most probably want to be remembered for his contribution to aviation. I think that his life and other men like himself that began their career in World War I would see the very beginnings and development of aviation and then seeing it applied in war. And he would step through to World War II all, in a sense, major points in the development of the aircraft up until that time. I feel that with the exposure he had to the development of the airmail service and the later competition route-to-route pre-commercial flights, that he was able to really have his hand on that trajectory of development. And certainly that helped him with the technical issues and other developments that he would foresee as a commander and later a colonal as the director of photo reconnaissance in World War II. In closing, he did have a daughter, as well as my father was his son, but they would unfortunately not grow up together. My grandfather, through separation and divorce, would be really separated from my father's life when he was 9. So I'm that one person that you talk about that dug deep to do the research to find the story of this man's life. I didn't know much about him, actually. I did know that he had been involved in photo reconnaissance, that he'd served in a high position. I didn't know at a colonel's level in reconnaissance. But so I find that in a way I feel so very fortunate that I took the bait, as it were, when I saw his military service record. And then fortunately, with the technology and jumping on the internet and going to Ancestry.com and going to newspapers.com, finding additional information set me down that road of discovery. I was asked, and I guess would be another a book interview the other day, what would he want to be remembered for? I would say it's certainly not, it's not the trophy chase of the case of the medals that he had or the other accolades that relate to his service, which he received distinguished service awards from England and from France after World War II. He would want to know that he played a role in developing the use and the popularity and the birth and the story of flight. And I think ultimately that would describe what he would like to be remembered for and what he would like to feel his accomplishments were. I came upon an archive, so I kind of delved a little bit into the process of research, and I guess my strongest recommendation is to anyone here who is thinking about starting a research process about a relative, whatever their involvement may be. I highly recommend it. It's an amazing, personally satisfying and rewarding experience. And you will find information online with newspapers.com and ancestry.com. So here's an example. I have a first cousin who I basically didn't know. Through my research, I found a way to reach her. We are of the same age, same generation. So we share a grandfather. And when I touched base with her and we finally connected, I didn't know whether she had, by virtue of her relationship to her mother, his second wife, whether she had any collectibles. Well, I found out that she had a treasure trove of physical collection of Army uniform, of portraits, of my grandfather's dog tags, of a slide history, 250 slides that showed an evolution of his life from World War I to World War II and then after, and and diaries and photo albums, all of that. So my journey has also included reconnecting with another member of my family who I would not know. And now we share that relationship. So that's been very important to me. And he, because of his lifestyle, et cetera, would not get to know my father, unfortunately, his son. They were separated at the age of 9. And then his daughter, through the second marriage, he would get to know a little bit better. She would come to the air base during World War II with him when she was 6 or 7 years old. And his, I had some quotes that were in the form of slides that came from my first cousin that I hadn't seen before. They're quotes taken from letters that he wrote to his daughter while he was the director of photo reconnaissance. So that's as close to first person as I'm probably going to get. And in one of the quotes, he said to his daughter, I want you to remember that your father flew airplanes from the propeller through to jet propulsion. And so he said, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to fly a prototype jet propulsion plane so that you can say that. So that is kind of, I guess, the final note I have on my father's, I guess, charisma, passion, and desire to live life as fully as he did. And I thank you all for the opportunity to be here and to present his story. I had to compress it. I'm certainly not as technically savvy about aviation as I would like to be. I learned through the research of this book. But I know I'm at about my time limit, so I want to again thank everybody for being here and being interested and joining my sharing of my personal discovery of my grandfather, who I really didn't know until I started down this research and wrote the book. I'm open to any questions. Certainly, I'll be here at the edge of the stage afterwards to chat with anybody. I brought some books and a press release if you want more information. But I'd just like to close that by saying thank you, grandfather. Now I've gotten a chance to know you, and I appreciate the opportunity of the audience to share my personal journey and part of his story. So thank you very much.